Hello, my name is Annette DeLu, and you are listening to The Heart of You. Today, we have an incredible topic, and it's all about you. That's exactly what we're going to be talking about today with author, speaker, and meditator Chris Cirak. He is passionate about turning sophisticated topics into accessible, meaningful, and inspiring experiences. He has an extensive background in design, psychology, and tech, and he breaks down traditional teachings to make ancient wisdom accessible and discoverable by modern audiences. His BU mindfulness program helps you gain transformative insights by following a simple step-by-step approach to reacting less and thriving more. He is also the author of BU, The Journey of Self-Realization. Chris, I want to welcome you to The Heart of You. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you so much, Annette. It's such a pleasure.
So, how we start off most of the episodes here on The Heart of You is to sort of dive a little bit into your spiritual journey and how it started.
Well, I think it's the way it starts for most people. We're born.
Mm-hmm.
And so suddenly we find ourselves in this body, in this material dimension, and it's quite a shock. And then we go through these experiences that start to shape us and form us. And a lot of conditioned beliefs, layers of external voices that set themselves in that we start to identify with. And so we all have our journey, we live our life, and to come to the realization that we seek ourselves on the outside, following other voices, following achievements and outcomes and these goals, this plan that we create for ourselves. Sometimes our entire life we plan out.
Mm-hmm.
And then as we go along, we realize, well, life has its own ways. And so we learn to, sometimes with more resistance, sometimes with less, we learn to let go of resistance and start to surrender more. And my own journey is the same, in that even though I had pursued and achieved a lot of the things that society says, will make you happy, and I found like there was something still missing. And even in the things, I had a lot of free time to pursue passions. And I found that even in those things, I was still living for outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
So you could be really passionate about something and have all the time in the world. But if you're still looking to, in my case, it was when I finish writing an album in music, or when I finally finish a book, or when I win a tournament. I'm a big tennis player, and all these things, I wasn't enjoying the moment, the experience of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so that really led me down the path of digging deeper. There has to be more to life. And I'm not one of the kind that, had to hit rock bottom. There's a lot of people out there that do, but for them to reach the turnaround point, for me, it was more like I did all the things you're supposed to do. But that wasn't it. There had to be more. Outcomes can certainly make you happy for a moment, but it's a fleeting happiness. It's a temporary happiness. And so,
right.
Yeah, seeking myself in all the things around us, which we should. Again, came from the spirit form, and suddenly we're in the body, and with sights and sounds and smells and all that around us. So we should become infatuated by those things. There's no sense and no value in rejecting anything, denying anything. But ultimately, those external experiences point us to the place where happiness is permanent, and that's within.
Yeah. And it's actually no surprise that, given what you are doing currently and the programs, the BU program that you're doing and the book that you wrote, it's no surprise that you did not necessarily have to hit that rock bottom, so to speak, because you were listening to yourself, your higher self. And a lot of times when we do hit rock bottom in those spiritual journeys, it's simply because we're not listening, right? And so we don't have to actually hit rock bottom. And that's part of what this podcast is all about, is giving people the tools so they don't have to go in those deep, dark places if they don't have to, right?
Yeah, exactly that. And once we kind of have those tools and we recognize that life is a mirror, when we feel triggered, it's something within us. It's always showing us who we are. And rather than try and control and steer the world around us,
Right.
so that we can feel a certain way. It's all about developing the mindset and then the knowledge and the tools to work on oneself.
Mm-hmm.
And then the outside world will mirror that back to us.
That's always the hard part, right? I mean, that's one of the biggest shifts that we have to make as humans, is understanding that when the universe is showing you something, so i.e., somebody is acting a certain way towards you, and then all of a sudden the next person you meet is acting the same way towards you. You have to start understanding that this is the universe showing you something that is within you that you need to take a look at, versus blaming other people. And I feel like that's probably one of the biggest things that we have to sort of relearn or unprogram, deprogram from ourselves in order to start living in the way that you're describing. So when that starts happening, when you start identifying, okay, so the way that I'm living right now is clearly, it's showing me something, and I've trying to figure out like what it is that I need to work on within myself. How do you go through that discovery process? Like, what is your process, Chris?
Yeah. Things really changed for me when I realized, and it took me a long time really to understand this. And then that really was one of the biggest turning points for me, is to recognize that my feelings about a particular situation and then my reaction to my feelings were two separate things.
Mm-hmm.
And the feelings ultimately were very small and manageable. Almost always they arise and pass if we let them, right? But with our reaction to them, either through resistance, but also through clinging, because we want more of it, of pleasant sensations, right? Both of those instances keep those emotions stuck, A, and amplify them, B. So we start to linger beyond the event and the emotions it caused in us. So we start to like become living out of sync, right? Because we're still hanging on to a past event and then trying to steer and control the new present moment to bring back or avoid something from the past. So it all becomes this mess and kind of this constant hiccup from observing things as they are, responding to our inner voice and taking clear action and moving on to the next fresh moment that arrives and responding to that. So that was really a big turning point for me. And how to do that really was through meditation, is to notice where in your body you're feeling things. That's feelings are in our body, and to notice that, to develop the awareness through meditation, in my case, to just feel your feelings, which is our natural state. That's how we're designed to live.
Right, absolutely. Unfortunately, I think society as a whole sort of teaches us that we are not either safe feeling our feelings, or that it is not something that is desirable for another person to show their feelings, right? So it is something that I think as we move through this process, we have to identify those places in which we have either stuffed the feelings or gone back and either covered them up through possible addictions or whatever it happens to be. Whatever you use to sort of cover up those past emotions, that all needs to sort of come to the surface to be released. So when it comes to that process, and as you're going through your spiritual journey, let's say, and you are clearing those emotions, you're clearing all of those things that have passed, I like to sort of identify it as almost like you're an empty vessel, right? You're clearing out all the things from the past, and now you're in the present moment. And sometimes that can be scary for people because, like you were saying, you almost get attached to that stuckness. You get attached to almost the negative feelings sometimes because it's like a security blanket. It's something that's familiar for you. So when you are in that space after you've sort of gotten rid of, those emotions, let's say integrated some of the experiences, the learning experiences, but then released those emotions, and you're in that space in between. So you're now in that beautiful 0 point. What are your recommendations for people of how to be comfortable in that space, how to work through that, and understanding that, okay, now I am no longer that person that used to be sad and upset all the time over this one event that happened 7 years ago, but now I am this person who is living in the present moment. How do you coach people to understand what that is like and how to move through that?
Yeah, and that's a great question. And it's absolutely scary because we're used to, controlling, but that's really it's a living through the mental lens where we think we're controlling and we try to control, and we ultimately are always trying to predict the future.
Right.
Yeah, right.
Right.
We can't take a shower without thinking about what we're going to do once we get out. It's
100%. Yeah.
So when we're just lodged in our head, and we're all conditioned largely to live in our minds for various reasons. We live in a world that is always eliciting some kind of mental reaction from us. I agree with, disagree with, for you, against you.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're just used to just seeing and living through that mental lens. What we spoke about is feeling your feelings is really being grounded in your body. So the whole exercise, the fear comes from this new experience of really allowing thoughts and feelings to be as they are without judging them, without thinking they're right or wrong, having a space, a gap between yourself, which your true essence is not your thoughts and your feelings. It's a deeper I.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's really getting used to not being in control from a mental place, but actually trusting yourself. And that trust naturally arises the more time we spend grounded in our body, feeling our feelings. The mind is a tool. It's nothing against the mind. Mind is a tool that is designed to know. And
Mm-hmm.
it's a great tool for organizational matters, for skills management and time management and memory. But when we use it to try and navigate life, it's not the right tool. It doesn't know us. It's something we should be using, but not letting it control us. So taking that control back from the mind by doing a lot of breath work, meditation, mindfulness, nature walks. I mean, there's so many things we can do to ground ourselves, taking our shoes off and just standing in the grass for
Mm-hmm.
30 seconds or a minute has all kinds of, if you're into research, you can look all that up, and how it has instant impact, positive impact on the body. And so it's living more in our body. The only socially sanctioned place in modern life is maybe sports, but you have to create that space for yourself and those little rituals, because they're not taught to us. There's no routine that is kind of built into everyday life. So we have to create that space for ourselves and take it little by little. I think most of the difficult feelings, it's less about the big feelings. It's more about these everyday little situations, getting cut off in traffic, or
Mm-hmm.
running out of toothpaste and
Right.
things like that, where
Yeah.
we can really develop our awareness muscle, as I call it, of just noticing how we react to things and where we feel that reaction, and then building up, just like going to the gym for our physical muscles. So we can start small and build our awareness muscle, and we can start with the little things and work our way up.
Yeah. I love the way that you put that, because it is 100% true, in the sense that, the brain, like you said, is good for certain things, but for guiding your life, maybe not so much. And the really beautiful part about being in that transitional space is that as you're taking those baby steps, it's awkward, right? But when you start anything new, it's awkward first, right? At first, you're kind of unsure. You're kind of like, okay, I'm going to take a step and see if it lands, and it's that process of sort of working through just those initial stages. But then once you get through those initial stages, then it becomes habit, and then it becomes a part of your life, right?
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah. I mean, building on your analogy of how we say learn to walk, it's
Yeah.
getting up again and again and trying again and again. What's important to know about that process is the progress doesn't come from being in the upright position.
Mm-hmm.
It's in the moving yourself. The muscles are in the balance is being developed, getting up in the getting up on your feet and then rising and then being vertical. That in between is actually the like lifting a weight, right? When it's down,
Mm-hmm.
you're not lifting at all. When it's up, you're kind of in stasis, but it's the in between process that really builds our muscle. And so no one should be afraid or get down on themselves for quote unquote failing, right? Which is a whole nother topic. And
Sure.
but just try again, give yourself a chance, try again, see what happens, and just try to let it flow.
Yeah. You were talking about, and I love the analogy of running out of toothpaste, because it's something that I actually still do, where like if you have a product that you use on a regular basis, it's like, oh, okay. So when am I going to run out of toothpaste? When do I need to go to the store to get some new, a new tube or whatever it is, So like it's this, like you said, it's this constant projection into the future of what it is that is going to be happening, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when we talk about these little 3D things that we have in life, so let's say, okay, so I identify myself, as my experience in the 3D as somebody who really likes anime, who really likes sci-fi and fantasy movies. I'm somebody who really likes, all of these different things, whatever it happens to be. And all of a sudden you go through this process and you start to realize that there are certain things that you don't actually like anymore, or that you don't actually enjoy doing anymore. And for me, the sci-fi fantasy movies, still love them. That's great. But there were other parts of those genres that I really couldn't stomach anymore. So some of the super violent stuff, some of the other stuff that I used to watch, like before my spiritual awakening, now it's just like, oh, I can't stomach it. Right. So as your tastes change, and when you go through this process, they can change significantly in terms of food, in terms of the people you hang out with, in terms of all of these things. So when those things start falling away, as they naturally do when you do this work, that's another level of fear that creeps in. It's like, oh my God, I don't know, like, who am I? Who am I without these three-dimensional things that I define as me? So how do you work through that process?
Well, I mean, that's the dark night of the soul, and it's not
right?
Easy by definition, right?
Yep.
So, sooner or later, your true self will come forth, and you may delay it. You may go back to your group of your comfort zones, but then, it'll show itself again, and it's all good. There's no right or wrong. If you're not ready yet, don't force yourself either.
Mm-hmm.
And it'll take some getting used to on so many levels, and thinking of your life and your circle of friends and your interests, so forth, is more fluid.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of hand in hand with getting more comfortable with the coming and going of everything, with experiences of every new moment coming in and bringing new opportunities that you didn't see before, because we were so more identified with our truth structure, as I call it.
Right.
And now that's kind of broken up, and you're just seeing things that you didn't before. You're more aware of things that you weren't before. You're more sensitive to things that you weren't sensitive to before. So yeah, everything changes. Just know that you're growing and expanding. You are an expansive person, and it wants to happen. This isn't coming out of anywhere. This is like, you want to, as a spiritual being, want to expand and really fully inhabit your blueprint of why you're here. And it's only our resistance, really, which is funny. Why do the very essence of our being, we resist that expansion, and we resist life showing us lessons. We resist, growing out of our comfort zones, and that's okay. That's kind of how life has to work. We can't just snap into a bigger version of ourselves, and it has to be a gradual kind of, sometimes painful process, but
sure,
embrace it and do the best you can. It's not, there's no template for it. There's no formula. Everyone has their own. And ultimately, what I really find encouraging, and once I saw this, was it really helped me to embrace the whole thing, is that the challenges, the things we struggle with the most, become our calling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's the things we become experts at, right?
Yeah.
Because we now overcome these things. We can then be light for other people, role models for others, and help them in those situations. So it's funny how life works. It's the things we resist the most is that ultimately attract us and make us who we are.
100%. Yeah. And, it's funny because I now am able to look at that resistance and those moments of resistance as gifts, because I have now seen the proof, so to speak, in my life, where I went through super challenging experiences early on in my life with codependency and all of these things. And now I realized, oh, okay. So once I discovered my sole purpose was to work in the Akashic records and to help people to really anchor in unconditional love into the world, I was like, oh, okay, now it makes sense and why I had to experience the antithesis of that in order to be able to come into what unconditional love actually means. And so oftentimes it can look like it's super unfair that, hey, the one thing that I want, I'm getting the exact opposite of. But how do you look at resistance sort of as that beautiful gift, and what tools do you use specifically to move through that resistance?
Yeah, great question. So when you look at just how life works, and the working subtitle for my book was The Secret Design of Life.
Ooh, yeah.
Yeah, it's really life has our utmost well-being, our highest expansion at heart. Everything is designed to make us grow. It's really the rest periods in between where things seem a little slower or kind of everything's staying in place. Those are the times we need to recover and recharge and then to get going again, to get into the expansion, next expansion phase. And it's really realizing, everything that triggers us points to something we need to work on. Our worst quote unquote enemies, right? This is where I say quote unquote a lot because we have these definitions that we carry around with ourselves, and there's a reaction or a sentiment attached to them. And so even saying enemy infers certain things, but ultimately those are our greatest teachers.
Yeah.
So those are the people that triggered me the most, as the ones that pushed me the hardest to find peace,
right.
and not blame it on them, but actually to look at myself. So, piece by piece, as one gets going on one's journey, you start to see these little glimpses of really this is what is in my best interest. And even things long ago that were quote unquote tragedies at the time then turn out to be, wow, I really needed that. And everything happened perfectly for me to become the person I am today.
Yeah. Truth is always in hindsight, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah. Yes.
Well, that is until you can get to this place of understanding and trusting that in this moment, okay, so the experience that you are having, and I always like to refer the sort of challenging people in your life as the villains in your story, right? And that's exactly what it is, because it's a story. I have often seen in many people's Akashic records that the people that they are really having challenges with in their life are actually part of their soul family, or people who are like super close to them on the energetic and spirit planes, but like on earth they're like, oh, hey, I'm going to come down and be the villain in your story today, for this lifetime, because this is something that you need, right? So yes. So it is about, sort of identifying those places where you are being challenged, and then trying to not get stuck into that patterning, right? And the conditioned behaviors and that patterning that you get sort of locked into, those things they can be super hard to identify, because I know, I mean, I don't know about you, but I'm constantly learning about new conditioned behaviors that I have that I didn't even realize that I had until all of a sudden it clicks, or it gets shown to me in some way. And I'm like, oh, wow. Okay, cool. I thought I had worked on that, but this is yet another version of it that is sort of coming out into light. And now I have to sort of identify those and strip those away. What would you recommend in terms of being able to identify those before they sort of slap you in the face, so to speak?
Yeah. So in my book, I talk about the 3 roads, and the long road being the one where we continue to stay in resistance to something till the end.
Yeah.
Right? That's the hardest road to travel. And the middle road is really, where most of our life happens. We tend to manifest situations, our reality, from inner lack, something that we feel we need to be happy. And so we create these situations, and then the situations are always, different than what we expected, just because we cannot predict or expect life in such high resolution as it then happens. But then after a short period of resistance, we tend to make peace with that situation. And that making peace with it deepens us, and we let go and we surrender. And so there's an acceptance there. And so this middle road is completely built into life as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because we realize being in resistance is just too hard. So we let go. So even if someone has no interest in a spiritual journey, it's still going to happen. Life will deepen us. And then what you're just referring to in your question is what I call the no road, where we don't have to manifest these big situations anymore that could, take up decades of our life. We
Right.
could pursue a job and a career and the big salary and then the house and all these things that we think will lead to that permanent happiness. And that takes a lot of time to then realize, oh, well, it's not so permanent.
Mm-hmm.
Relationship, same thing. And so if we notice the tools being noticing when we feel triggered, when we feel our feelings and not try and steer them, then we can stay out of reactivity and respond to every situation more clearly. And that clear decisions lead to better decisions. And then ultimately we don't get so deep into one direction or another before we then realize, oh, this was not the way to go. But if it happens, it's okay.
Mm-hmm.
Through self-awareness and seeking solutions and a deeper kind of understanding of self, one develops greater awareness and greater empathy, and we see things for what they are and less colored through the lens of the past and those family patterns that you speak about, which run so deep. I mean, you could have been, as a little child, been at the supermarket with your mom, and right in that moment when you needed attention, she turned to get a product from another aisle, and boom, abandonment hit.
Yeah.
And so you're right. There's almost no way to track and remember all the events that led to all these stuck feelings, all this inner trauma. The techniques that I teach and talk about in terms of meditation really focus on your sensations, what caused them, where they came from isn't really important. The fact that you're feeling them is all that matters. And you give those emotions space to be, no longer pushing them away or clinging to them. And that loosens them up and they start to come to the surface and leave us again.
Sure.
And so we are healing machines, meant to, right? Heal ourselves. So we just have to kind of jump on board.
Well, it's about, pointing in that right direction, right? So if you are naturally going to, let's say, integrate and transmute energy, which as humans and spiritual beings, that's what we do constantly. But if you're in that resistance, it's going to be it's not that it stops. It's going to be a much, much slower process. As you were saying, it's the long road, right?
Yes, exactly.
The one thing I wanted to dive a little bit deeper in is the belief systems that you sort of take on that aren't yours, that are being almost like pushed on you by other people. So let's say your mom says to you, oh, I can't wait to have grandkids and I can't wait to, and you have no desire to have children, or, things like that, where you have family members or friends or other people who are constantly kind of pushing their own desires on you. And you actually, instead of drawing your own boundaries and drawing healthy boundaries, you actually do take those on yourself and say, oh, this is something I have to do, without actually even asking yourself if this is something you actually want. So how do you navigate that?
Yeah. So most of those outside voices, even when they're well-meaning, like you say, it could be parents just wanting the best for you, and you just don't have the tools at that age to not take it on as your own truth. These outside voices are like a mental, it's a head voice, I call it. And it's very different than your inner voice, your higher self, your inner divinity, your heart, your gut, your intuition, whatever you want to call it. That is in our bodies. That wisdom of who we are resides in our bodies. So there is so much noise in our heads. It tends to drown out that inner voice, which tends to be subtle and polite. And but there too, having a daily practice of coming out of your head and into your body, it'll amplify your inner voice, which it's amazing. Even with all that noise of our busy lives, we still tend to hear that inner voice. We don't listen to it every time, but it's always there, right? It's always kind of there. And you have a little hit of what is in alignment with you versus, doing something somebody else said. So, but that is the journey, is learning to come out of the head again and connecting with your true self in your body, feeling your feelings, your truth that arises from within it's a very different type of truth. It doesn't require comparison. It doesn't look at, what is everyone else doing. It's not fickle. It doesn't switch from one day to the next. It's always a little test when people ask. I say, well, if you think you've come across like a solution and you're wondering if it's, really your truth, well, just wait a day and see if you feel as confident about it tomorrow. Because the mind will jump from one thing to the next. But that inner truth is just rock solid. It's you. It doesn't matter whatever anyone else says. And it kind of stays there. It's persistent. It nags you.
Yeah. It's a constant. Absolutely.
Yeah.
When it comes to those discerning thoughts, let's say, regarding, okay, so if somebody is placing their own beliefs or their own desires on me, and I'm going to use my discernment in terms of identifying where they are and where I am and what my desires are, how I'm going to draw those boundaries, and then firmly state what it is that I truly want and say, you know what, for example, that's really great. I know that you really want grandkids, Mom, but this is not something that I really see for my life, and that my inner being is telling me that this is not something that I want for my life, right? So being able to do that, then when the other person doesn't react the way that you would want them to with acceptance, there's that judgment that kind of comes up, right? And the judgment of, well, you don't know what you're saying, you might change your mind, you might blah, whatever it happens to be. How do you move through that judgment? Because we know that within the judgment, it does create that separation, right? It creates that separation between you and that other person, because there's not that understanding, or there's not that connection. And then also when we have judgment within ourselves, it creates separation between us and the connections we have with other people. So once you have drawn those boundaries and you're in that space of, okay, so I'm clear on what conditioned behaviors are theirs, and I'm clear on what my desires are and what my soul wants me to do. And yet the reaction that I'm getting in the 3D is the antithesis of that.
Yeah. So that same initial mindset that you describe of like, I know, those are your values, Mom, if it's your mom saying it, right?
Sure. Yeah.
I hear you, and I know it matters a lot to you. All that initial kind of seeing, what I describe this as is seeing the experience that the other person is seeking to have when they come to you, when they speak.
Yeah.
If we can stay there, then we see that, then we're all our focus, our energy is with them, their needs. We see their motivation, any agenda, or wherever they're coming from. And there's no judgment there. The judgment comes in when we compare it to our own beliefs, when we try to validate our own, we become defensive then. But when we're with them fully, then we just see them for who they are. We don't want them to be different. And so if we stay in that space, so even when they come back with, and what about
right.
all of this, or I'm writing you out of my will, whatever.
Right.
It's to stay on, with them and the experience they're seeking to have, and just validating that. You don't have to become defensive about it. You can support that in very much the way you described. It's like, I hear that's your need and you really wish that would happen. My calling is different at this time, and that's just how it's going to be. And as long as we're not in reactivity, reactive energy is accusatory, it's harsh, people become defensive. And that's really where these types of conversations get out of hand and cause these sometimes rifts and splits in the family that can last forever. But if we stay ourselves out of reactivity, and that is, again, if we feel triggered, we're feeling triggered by whatever that person is saying, and noticing the feelings, the sensations on our body, the noticing of that breaks the reactive loop. So we can then come out of reactivity as long as we're connected to our feelings and allowing those feelings to arise and pass. If we react to them, oh, I don't want to feel this way, and that person is the blame for it, right? Then it all gets out of hand. So self-control, self-awareness, and then staying with the other person throughout the whole conversation, not just the initial response, but throughout. that's it may not go perfectly like that. Everything needs to be practiced.
Yeah, of course.
But when we changed our side, my family too, I was lucky to have a very good family dynamic, but there were some issues, and it came to the point where I realized, well, I'm at least 50% part of those dynamics, right? And taking responsibility of that. I'm keeping my reactivity is keeping this dynamic in place. And so once I started taking that responsibility and caring for myself and dealing with my reactivity, those relationships changed as well, because I brought change into the dynamic by no longer reacting, no longer pushing back on things that family members were used to me pushing back on. And then suddenly that gave them some space to self-reflect as well. And everything turned out incredibly, we can't expect them to change, but it gives it a chance. I've seen many, many people report back that their whole, everything has improved for the better.
Yeah. Well, you can't expect things to change, but yet they do,
Yes,
right?
yes.
Because when you do this type of work, it is really super miraculous to be able to look back on the relationships you've had with people and say, wow, that is really transformed. And it has nothing to do with the other person changing their behavior or changing who they are. It has everything to do with the work that you're doing yourself. Now, that being said, nothing is perfect ever because we're humans, right? So, I mean, you were talking about the reactions, and it just sort of sparked a story in my head. It's something recently that happened. So I was visiting my mom in the United States, and our relationship has transformed into this beautiful relationship, whereas it had been super, super challenging throughout most of my life. And so I was, I sort of had my, my guard down. It was like, I was in the flow and everything was great. And all of a sudden, after a couple of days of seeing her, I got sick. And so I was now in sort of like this energy of, feeling kind of crappy and not being, at the top of my game, so to speak, energetically. And immediately she went into mom mode of, oh, what can I get you? I'll get you some more tea. Oh, do we need to go to the doctor? Oh, maybe we need to, like, she's just fussing. And, I haven't had her do this. It's probably since I was 16, right? So all of a sudden, this thing just came out of me where I was so irritated by this behavior that I was like, can you please just leave me alone? Like, I'm fine. I'll let you know if I need anything. Like, and I did. My reaction at a certain point was to almost snap at her because I was getting so frustrated, right? But it was not something that I had ever anticipated. It was not something that I could have seen ahead of time to sort of know how I would react, because it was just this exact same circumstance. But the difference was, and this is the beautiful part, is that I had my reaction, but then just maybe an hour or two later, I was like, oh, okay. So I went to my mom and I said, look, Mom, sorry I snapped at you, but like, I'm feeling really crappy. And then having you constantly asking me questions doesn't make me feel better. Like, it makes me feel a little bit of your anxiety. So let's kind of either separate, or like you go to the pool and I'll go do something else, like, just like for a few minutes, just so we can regroup and then we can come back together. Yeah. Right. So it's something that is something that we're constantly working on, especially with the people that we love and the people that have known us our whole life, that these little things will pop up. And for my mom, when I finally looked at it, I realized that ultimately she had not been able to play that role of mother since I lived with her when I was a teenager, right? So to her, it was like, ooh, okay, my 49-year-old daughter is sick and I can take care of her. And this makes me really happy because I can play the role of the mom. So she's trying to fulfill a need that she has. And that in and of itself was not sort of meshing with what my energy was at that time, right? So all of these things just sort of showed me how imperfect this is, but how you can actually transform and change based on the tools that you have.
Yeah.
And this is what you are offering to people.
Yes, exactly. And that's a beautiful story. Thank you for sharing. Maybe at a prior point, it wouldn't have been 1 or 2 hours. It might have been a day or two, right? Before you.
Right.
And so there's always improvement, 5%, 2%, 1%, 10%, whatever it is. it's not like awareness isn't like a switch on or off. It's like a muscle. You develop it, and every percentage improvement brings betterment and brings light into our into our relationships and our environment, and things change. And then being able to speak openly and non-reactively about it afterwards, that kind of sealed the deal. And maybe next time it'll just be half an hour.
Right. Yeah. Well, and to clarify, there was a time prior to this where something had happened. It wasn't the same situation, but it was not a couple of days. It was I'm booking a flight tomorrow to leave. So, there's there are great extremes in both of those situations, and I'm very happy to be on the other side of it. I can definitely tell you that.
So that was a huge improvement.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
And cheaper too, much cheaper.
Very true. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Last minute flights are definitely not cheap. So tell me a little bit about your BU mindfulness program that you have.
Yeah. I do individual coaching online and in person, but particularly my BU retreats where, in my journey as well, I heard a lot of, I was watching a lot, I was reading a lot, I went to retreat after retreat, and many of them were intellectually understanding and talks and all that. That's great. That's an important first step to like get it, right? But then the practice of it, and I felt like a lot of places fell short of that. And so what I wanted to do with these retreats is really implement not just the theory of things, but also the practice of things, so that we can really take that back into our daily lives and not view mindfulness as a separate activity, yoga or meditation or breath work, and then you go out and live the rest of your life, but rather that you learn to bring the essence of your presence into the daily situations and make that a foundation. Also, what I found was that most retreats were too one-sided. It would just be yoga, or it would just be a talk, or maybe yoga and surfing, but not that was still just movement, right?
Right.
The BU retreats are designed to really be a healthy balance between learning to be, and be in stillness. We do noble silence half a day, and then going and doing and experiencing culinary delights and nature and community and art. Depending on the location, it could be surfing lessons, it could be
beautiful,
it could be the local history and museums, and so it's about as full of a life experience as I wish I had when I was kind of earlier in my journey. And even now, I mean, I would be happy to take one of my own retreats if I wasn't leading.
Yeah. It sounds beautiful, because that is exactly what is needed right now, because you have to experience, right? You have to experience in order to know that something is resonant for you, or know that this is, something that works for you, right? And as you said, when you're just learning something almost like on an academic level, like you can learn, okay, what does it mean to move through conditioned behaviors? You can learn that, but unless you actually start putting it into practice and understanding what it means, you're only getting one half of the equation. So that's great.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, that first time when you're giving an emotion space to be, and you're observing it arise and then pass, where like things that we used to hang on to and hold on to, suddenly they dissolve back into the flow and the ether. That's just a feeling you can't even describe with words. And so the true magic of life starts to show itself.
Yeah, absolutely. And you have a couple of these in-person retreats coming up. So can you tell us a little bit about those?
Yeah, absolutely. Got a couple coming up. Just finished California, but we have Portugal after that, and then Bali again at the end of the year. And we're also looking at doing some Mexico and Canada locations. So it's ever evolving, the calendar. The best way to stay on top of that is, check out my website,
which is
Cirak.com. That's Cirak.com. Mm-hmm.
Fantastic. Great. And you can also follow Chris on Instagram, Facebook, and Clubhouse, TikTok. Yes.
Yeah, I'm on all of them. Yeah. The handle is the same, at Chris Cirak.
So it's ChrisCirak. Awesome.
That's it.
Chris, thank you so much for joining me today. This has been such a beautiful conversation, and I am so looking forward to people really absorbing this information and really learning how to uncover that beautiful you, right?
Yes, yes, absolutely. Life wants us to be us.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
wonderful. Thanks for having me on,
Yeah.
Annette.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Thanks, you too.
Have an amazing day and never stop exploring your soul, because it is the most important relationship you will ever have. If you are interested in learning more about me and the sessions that I do, feel free to go to my website at infinitesoullove.com. On all social media, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube at Infinite Soul Love 1111. Hey, and if you feel called, I would love it if you could rate The Heart of You on whatever streaming service you're using, whether it's Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Please take a moment, give it a review. It really does help the channel. Thanks so much.